They had conquered 14 star systems. They had cracked moons like eggs. They had made entire civilizations kneel without firing a single shot. But on a warm Saturday morning in June, the Zorvian Dominion pointed their warships at San Francisco during Pride weekend and made the single most catastrophic military decision in the history of the known universe. The fleet commander, Overlord Draven, looked down at the city glittering below him and said, with absolute confidence, "This will take 4 hours." It took less than that. Not because the humans surrendered, but because San Francisco fought back in a way no war college, no battle simulation, and no intelligence report had ever prepared them for. If you've never heard what happens when an alien invasion runs straight into the loudest, proudest, most unapologetically chaotic city on the West Coast, buckle up. Hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and drop a comment telling me, what did you think the aliens' first mistake was? Now let's go. Because this story starts 40 miles above the Earth, and it ends in the most San Francisco way imaginable. The warship was called the Eternal Verdict. It was 3 kilometers long, built from black alloy mined from a dead star, and it had never lost an engagement in 40 years of active service. Overlord Draven stood at the forward observation deck, hands clasped behind his back, staring down at the pale blue coastline of North America's western edge. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with gray-plated armor that had been custom-fitted after his promotion to High Overlord, a rank that came with its own ceremonial cape, which he wore at all times, including during breakfast. Draven had not always been this confident. He had earned it slowly, through campaigns on 7 different worlds, through cold calculations and colder victories. He did not consider himself cruel. He considered himself efficient, and efficiency in his experience always won. His intelligence officer, Lieutenant Cray, stepped forward with a mission briefing. Cray was younger, sharper, and quietly terrified of getting things wrong in front of Draven. "Overlord," Cray said, pulling up a holographic map of the target city. "San Francisco, California. Population approximately 870,000, located on a peninsula. Economically significant, culturally influential, heavy concentration of technology infrastructure. The humans consider it one of their most important cities." Draven studied the map. "Government seat? No, sir. Military command center? Minimal military presence, sir." Draven's eye moved along the coastline. "Then why this city?" Cray hesitated. "Our cultural analysis division flagged it as symbolically powerful. Humans speak about it constantly. They make entertainment about it. They reference it in their political discussions. And our behavioral data shows an extremely high concentration of what appears to be civic pride among the local population." Draven nodded slowly. "Break their pride, break their will. That was the assessment, sir." A second officer, Commander Walsh, a human defector from a previous failed contact mission who now served as cultural advisor to the fleet, raised his hand from the back of the room. Walsh had been with the Dominion for 6 years. He had tried many times to explain human behavior to Zorvian commanders. He had been ignored many times. "Permission to speak, Overlord." Draven waved his hand without looking at him. Briefly, Walsh pulled up a secondary data file. "Sir, the timing is a problem. This weekend is San Francisco's Pride celebration. It's the largest annual public event in the city. We're looking at somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 additional people on the streets. The crowd density is extreme." And he searched for the right word. The psychological profile of this particular crowd, on this particular weekend, is not what our standard civilian models predict. Draven looked at him for the first time. "Meaning," Walsh chose his words very carefully, "meaning, sir, that these are not people who scare easily. These are people who have spent years, in many cases their entire lives, learning not to back down when someone tries to intimidate them." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Draven said, "Everyone is intimidated by orbital bombardment." Walsh opened his mouth, closed it, wrote a note on his personal datapad that said simply, "I tried." Draven turned back to the map. The city glittered on the hologram, the bay, the bridges, the hills, the dense grid of streets already packed with color and movement. From 40 miles up, it almost looked peaceful. "What is the current status of their annual event?" Draven asked. Cray pulled up live surveillance feeds. The streets of San Francisco were already packed. Market Street was a river of color. Floats moved slowly through crowds so thick they spilled off the sidewalks and onto the storefronts. Music poured from every direction. People wore costumes that ranged from elaborate theatrical constructions to paint and confidence. Food carts lined every block. Performers worked every corner. The entire city smelled, according to the atmospheric sensors, like sunscreen, street food, and something the sensor labeled as unclassified festive compounds. Cray stared at the feed. "Sir, they are celebrating, loudly. Good," Draven said. "Then they are distracted." Walsh put his head in his hands. Draven straightened his cape and gave the order that would destroy his career, his reputation, and his personal belief that the universe operated according to logic. "Begin the invasion," he said. "Target Market Street. Deploy all ground forces. We end this before their celebration ends." Far below in the streets of San Francisco, nobody knew what was coming. The music was loud. The crowd was enormous. The floats were moving. And somewhere on Market Street, a man named Gary Coleman, not the famous one, a different one, a retired high school drama teacher from Marin County who was currently wearing a sequined jacket and carrying a trombone, was about to have the most important afternoon of his entire life. The first. Dropships broke through the clouds at 1:47 p.m. and San Francisco looked up and did not run. The ships came down fast. 6 black dropships, each the size of a city block, descending through the afternoon sky above Market Street with blue engine fire trailing behind them like burning ribbons. The shadow they threw across the crowd was enormous. The noise was a deep, resonant hum that hit people in the chest before it reached their ears, for exactly 3 seconds. The crowd went quiet. Then someone in a giant butterfly costume near 5th Street looked up and said loudly, "Okay, that is an incredible float." The person next to them said, "That's not a float. The lighting is amazing, though." The first dropship hovered directly over the intersection of Market and 8th. A massive speaker array descended from its underside. Overlord Draven's voice came through, translated into English by the Dominion's language processors, which had been trained on human media from approximately 2003 and therefore occasionally used phrases that felt slightly off. "Attention, human persons. Your city is now under the authority of the ZORVIAN Dominion. Please cease your festivities and submit to processing." The crowd stared upward. A man named Doug Fletcher, 54, a contractor from Concord who had come to the parade with his wife Linda and their adult son Kevin, looked at the ship, looked at his wife, and said, "Is this part of the parade?" Linda said, "I don't think so, Doug." Kevin was already filming. The second dropship deployed its ground troops. 40 Zorvian shock troopers descended on gravity platforms, landing in perfect military formation directly in front of a pride float decorated with thousands of silk flowers, and a sound system playing a pop anthem at approximately 115 decibels. The troops raised their plasma rifles. Their armor gleamed. Their formation was textbook perfect. The float did not stop. The driver of the float, a man named Terry Walsh, no relation to the Dominion's cultural advisor, was 61 years old, had been driving parade floats for 11 years, and had a personal policy of never stopping for anything that wasn't a direct instruction from the parade coordinator. He leaned out of his cab, looked at the alien soldiers blocking the street, and spoke into his radio. He got a blockage at Market and 8th. Alien soldiers. Requesting guidance. The parade coordinator, a woman named Sandra, replied immediately. "Can you go around them?" Terry looked at the soldiers. The soldiers looked at Terry. "Maybe," he said. He went around them. The float clipped the edge of the alien formation with a cascade of silk flowers. Several Zorvian soldiers were briefly buried under them. One emerged with a pink peony sitting directly on top of his helmet. He stood at attention and tried to pretend it wasn't there. On the command ship, Cray watched this happen in real time. "Overlord, the civilian parade vehicle has bypassed the formation." Draven stared. "It bypassed 40 armed soldiers. It had the right of way, sir." The humans appear to have a strong respect for established parade routes. Draven's eye twitched, on the ground. The Zorvian squad leader, a veteran officer named Second Talon Vex, took stock of his situation. His formation was partially decorated with parade flowers. The crowd was not fleeing. Some were filming. Some were cheering, apparently believing this was a theatrical addition to the festivities. One man was trying to hand him a schedule of events. Vex took it because he didn't know what else to do. He keyed his communicator. "Command, the civilians are not demonstrating fear responses." Draven's voice came back hard. "Make them fear you. Fire a warning shot." Vex aimed his plasma rifle skyward and fired. A blue bolt exploded 30 feet above the crowd. The crowd made a noise, but it was not screaming. It was the noise a crowd makes when fireworks go off unexpectedly. A collective gasp, followed immediately by applause. Someone yelled, "They've got fireworks too," someone else yelled. "Best pride ever." Vex lowered his rifle slowly. "Command," he said very carefully. "The warning shot has been interpreted as a celebratory gesture." A long pause from the command ship. Then Draven said, "Fire another one." Another bolt. More cheering. A man near the front of the crowd raised both arms and whooped. Vex put his rifle down. He looked at his squad. "New strategy," he said. "We moved to the secondary objective." The secondary objective was City Hall. It was a beautiful building, a domed, white granite structure that sat at the end of Civic Center Plaza. On a normal Saturday, it was impressive. On Pride Saturday, it was covered in enormous banners and surrounded by thousands of people, food trucks, music stages, and a security perimeter staffed by both SFPD officers and a volunteer force of event staff who took their jobs with intense seriousness. The Zorvian squad moved up 8th Street toward Civic Center in tight formation. They made it 1 block before they hit the first obstacle. The obstacle was a man named Gary Coleman, the drama teacher from Marin County, who was standing in the middle of the street playing his trombone with the concentrated energy of someone who had been waiting his whole life for an audience this size. He was not going to move. He had a permit. Vex stopped in front of him. "Civilian, this street is under Dominion control. Move aside." Gary lowered the trombone 6 inches. He looked at the alien. He looked at the alien's armor. He looked at the rest of the squad. He raised the trombone back to his lips. He played louder. Vex reached out to physically move him. Gary sidestepped with the smooth efficiency of a man who had spent 30 years managing high school theater kids and knew exactly how to make a stubborn person feel invisible without ever raising his voice. He was now 6 feet to the left of where he had been, still playing. Still permitted behind him. The trombone section of a marching band rounded the corner and fell in behind Gary without missing a beat. The Zorvian squad was now facing a wall of brass instruments. Vex keyed his communicator again. "Command, we have encountered organized sonic resistance on 8th Street, and deep in the crowd, where nobody was watching yet." SFPD Sergeant Thomas Reed had already made 3 phone calls and was reaching for his radio with the expression of a man who had handled the bay to breakers race. 3 separate tech company launch parties, and 1 very confusing incident involving a trained monkey, and was not about to let aliens ruin his Saturday. The invasion had been running for 11 minutes. And it was already going wrong in ways Draven had no words for. But the worst was still coming, because nobody had told the aliens about the Castro district yet. Sergeant Thomas Reed was not a man who panicked. He was 48 years old, built like a piece of furniture, and had a face that suggested he had personally witnessed every possible way a situation could go sideways, and had stopped being surprised by any of them. He had spent 22 years with the SFPD. He had worked every major event the city hosted. He had a reputation among his officers for being the calmest person in any room, at any time, under any circumstances. He looked at the 6 alien warships hovering above Market Street and said, quietly into his radio, "All units, this is Sergeant Reed. We have an actual extraterrestrial incursion in progress. I need crowd control on Market from 5th to 12th. I need units at Civic Center. I need the parade coordinator on the line, and I need someone to tell the float drivers to hold position. And somebody please tell the trombone people to fall back." His partner, Officer Dale Briggs, 31, who had been on the force for 4 years and had never seen anything like this, and was hoping very hard that his body language wasn't showing it, said, "Sarge, are those real?" Reed looked at the ships. "They're blocking the parade route, so yeah, I'd say they're real enough." "What do we do?" Reed clicked his radio again. "Same thing we always do. We keep people safe and we stay between them and the problem. The problem is just a little bigger today." Briggs looked at the plasma rifles. "A little bigger, Dale? Yeah, focus." Meanwhile, the Zorvian 2nd Squad had made a decision that would haunt their unit's historical record for generations. Draven had ordered 2 platoons to push into the Castro district, the heart of the neighborhood, where the secondary celebration was densest and where, according to their cultural intelligence models, the humans would be most psychologically vulnerable due to emotional investment in the event. The intelligence model was wrong in a way that was almost impressive. The Castro on Pride Saturday was not a place of vulnerability. It was a place of concentrated, organized, cheerful, and completely fearless energy. The streets were packed. Every business was open. Music came from every doorway. The sidewalks were so full that movement happened in slow human rivers, shoulder to shoulder. Everyone knowing exactly where they were going and feeling completely comfortable about it. The Zorvian platoon, 35 soldiers in full combat armor, pushed into the neighborhood from Market Street and immediately found that their formation, which required approximately 8 feet of horizontal clearance, did not fit. The crowd did not part. The crowd absorbed them. Squad leader First Claw Marin, a veteran of 4 planetary pacifications, found himself wedged between a man in an elaborate feathered costume and a woman pushing a food cart, loaded with breakfast burritos. His rifle was pressed against his chest by the sheer density of human bodies. 2 soldiers behind him had been separated. One was being asked for a photo. He had not said yes. He had also not figured out how to say no in a way the person would accept. Marin keyed his communicator. Command, we are in the secondary district. The civilians they are everywhere. We cannot move in formation. They are not hostile, but they are very close. Cray relayed this to Draven. The Castro platoon reports extreme crowd density, sir. Push through. Sir, they physically cannot. There are too many people. A pause. Have them fire into the air. Marin received this order and looked at the crowd around him. Thousands of people, nowhere to run, buildings on both sides. He made a command decision. No, he said into the communicator. Cray blinked. First Claw, Overlord Draven has issued a direct. I said no. We are not firing into a crowd with no exit routes. We hold position. There was silence on the command channel. Draven's voice came back very quietly. First Claw Marin, sir. You will, with respect, sir, I will not. And if you want to relieve me of command, you're going to have to come down here yourself. Because I am currently surrounded on all sides by civilians and a man who is offering me a breakfast burrito and seems genuinely hurt that I haven't taken it. Another silence. Then Draven said, through what sounded like a clenched jaw, hold position. Meanwhile, the man with the breakfast burrito, whose name was Carl Stevens, 44. A software engineer from the outer sunset who volunteered every Pride weekend at a community food cart, had decided that the alien soldiers were some kind of theatrical group and was determined to make them feel welcome. He had already given burritos to 3 of them. One had accepted out of sheer confusion. He was now holding it with both hands, unsure what to do with it, while Carl explained the ingredients. It's got black beans, roasted peppers, cheddar. And I do a cilantro lime crema that people really respond to. You guys want hot sauce? The soldier looked at his squad leader. Marin looked at the soldier. Do not eat that. The soldier looked at the burrito. He had been in combat for 6 years. He had never wanted anything as much as he wanted to know what cilantro lime crema tasted like. Back on Market Street, SFPD had set up a response line behind the Civic Center Plaza. Reed had pulled together 40 officers, 3 mounted units, and had radio contact with the National Guard coordinator, who was currently 40 minutes out. He also had something the aliens hadn't accounted for. He had the parade marshals. The parade marshals were volunteers. They wore bright yellow vests and earpieces and had the structured, serious, quietly powerful energy of people who had spent months organizing something they cared deeply about and were not going to let it be disrupted. Their lead marshal was a man named Patrick Holt, 58, a retired logistics manager who ran the volunteer team with the precision of a military operation, because that was, in fact, what he was trained in. Patrick Holt had served 8 years in the Army before retiring and moving to San Francisco. He had managed supply chains in 3 different countries under active conflict conditions. And when the alien warships appeared over Market Street, he had done 4 things in rapid succession. He had contacted all 40 of his section marshals by radio. He had established a communication chain with Reed's command position. He had begun redirecting parade floats to side streets to clear the main corridor. And he had identified the location of every alien ground unit currently visible. Reed looked at the map Holt handed him. You did this in 11 minutes. Been doing this event for 7 years, Sergeant. I know every inch of this route, and those ships are parked in the middle of it. Reed looked at the map. Then at Holt, you want to help? Holt was already on the radio. The situation on the ground was about to shift. But before it did, something happened in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood that nobody had planned for, nobody could have predicted, and that Overlord Draven would later describe. In his formal report to the High Council, as the turning point at which we should have reconsidered everything, a Zorvian scout unit of 8 soldiers had pushed into the Haight, looking for a position with elevated sightlines to the bay. They had found one, the roof of a Victorian painted lady on the corner of Haight and Steiner. They had kicked in the door at street level and gone up the stairs. What they had not known was that the building was occupied. Specifically, it was occupied by 3 generations of the Mercer family, who had owned it since 1971. Specifically, it was currently occupied by 78-year-old Harold Mercer, his son Brian, 52, and Brian's teenage son Jake, who was home from school. And Harold Mercer was sitting in his kitchen when 8 armed aliens came through his front door. And he looked at them over the top of his coffee mug with the expression of a man who had lived through 4 decades of San Francisco history and was mildly annoyed. "You got a warrant?" Harold said. The squad leader stared at him. "I didn't think so," Harold said. He picked up his phone. He called his neighbor Dave. Dave was a retired firefighter. Dave called his neighbor Pete. Pete called the block association. Within 6 minutes, a group of 12 men, average age 61, average years in the neighborhood 24, were standing on the sidewalk outside the Victorian. Looking up at the alien soldiers on the roof, Brian Mercer leaned out the second-floor window. "Dad, what's happening?" Harold's voice came from the kitchen. "Aliens on the roof, call the city." Brian called the city. The city was already aware. But the block association was already moving, and that, as anyone in San Francisco knew, was something the city itself couldn't always manage. The aliens had taken a roof. But they had done it in the wrong neighborhood. And now 12 retired San Franciscans, 3 of whom had served in the military, 4 of whom had fought City Hall over zoning disputes, and one of whom, Harold Mercer himself, had once successfully sued a major telecommunications company over a billing error, were standing below them with expressions of unified, quiet determination. The squad leader looked down at them. Harold looked up. "Young man," he said to a 7-foot armored alien, "get off my roof." The alien did not get off the roof, but he was about to wish he had. The battle for San Francisco did not happen in one place. It happened everywhere simultaneously, in the specific and personal way that San Francisco did everything, neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block. Each confrontation shaped entirely by whoever happened to be standing there when the aliens arrived. Sergeant Reed had established a forward command position at Civic Center. He had officers on the ground from Market to the Embarcadero. He had radio contact with Patrick Holt's Marshall Network, which had become, in the space of 40 minutes, the most effective civilian coordination structure in the city. And he had eyes on the alien command ship through a pair of binoculars, watching it drift slowly above Van Ness Avenue like the world's most threatening parade balloon. The first organized confrontation happened at the intersection of Market and Castro. The Zorvian platoon, that had been absorbed into the Castro crowd, had finally managed to push to the edge of the neighborhood, where the crowd thinned slightly and they could breathe. They set up a position on the wide sidewalk outside a hardware store. Their equipment was intact. Their formation was reestablished. Their morale was, according to their unit assessment later, operationally functional but emotionally complicated by the burrito incident. Reed arrived with 12 officers, 2 mounted units, and Patrick Holt, who was carrying a clipboard and a radio and projecting the calm authority of someone who had managed a much larger logistical problem this very morning, the alien platoon leader. First Claw Marin looked at the police line forming across the street. He recognized a command posture when he saw it. He keyed his communicator. "Command, we have organized law enforcement at the Castro position, armed, structured." "They have a man with a clipboard." Draven's voice came back. "Is the clipboard man a threat?" A pause. Marin watched Holt redirect a float around a side street with a single hand gesture while simultaneously speaking into his radio without breaking stride. "Yes," Marin said. "Absolutely yes." The standoff at Castro held for 4 minutes. During those 4 minutes, 3 news helicopters appeared overhead. 2 food cart operators pushed their carts between the police line and the alien position, because the foot traffic was still excellent. A man named Steve tried to walk his dog through the middle of the standoff and had to be redirected twice, and Carl Stevens reappeared with more burritos. Reed spoke across the standoff. Steady and clear. You're in the middle of a public event with a few 100,000 people around you. You've got nowhere to push to. You've got no supply line. And you landed during Pride, which means every person in this neighborhood has spent their whole life learning not to back down when someone shows up uninvited and tries to tell them what to do. He let that land. So let's talk about what comes next. Marin stared at him. Reed waited. Before Marin could respond, the ground shook. A deep, rhythmic vibration moved up through the pavement from the direction of the Embarcadero. Both sides looked east. The Zorvian ground force that had been assigned to the ferry building had encountered a problem. The ferry building on a normal Saturday was a bustling farmer's market. On Pride Saturday, it was a farmer's market that had absorbed approximately 6,000 additional people, 3 live music acts, and an artisan hot sauce vendor named Marcus Webb, who had been setting up at 5 a.m. and was not going to lose a single day of sales to a military incursion from another star system. The alien squad had attempted to commandeer the ferry building as a forward operations post. Marcus had told them, in very plain language, that they could not have it. The squad leader had pointed a plasma rifle at his hot sauce display. Marcus had picked up a jar of his Ghost Pepper Reserve, which he sold for $18 and which had once caused a tech journalist to briefly lose the ability to form sentences, and thrown it with the accuracy of someone who had played college baseball and still threw on weekends. The jar hit the alien's visor. The seal cracked. The Ghost Pepper Reserve got in. What followed was not covered in any Zorvian tactical manual. The alien's scream was loud enough to register on the ferry building's structural sensors. His squad retreated in confused panic. 3 of them backed into the bay, not intentionally, but because the crowd behind them was solid and they had nowhere else to go. They were not in danger of drowning, their suits were sealed, but they were in the bay during Pride weekend. And several kayakers paddled over to investigate. The Zorvian fleet commander watched the bay feed. One of his elite shock troops was being circled by a man in a kayak wearing a sequined life vest who kept asking if they needed help. "Command," the alien in the water said, "please send extraction." "I am being assisted." On Market Street, Draven deployed his armored walker unit. 2 heavy combat machines descended from the ships, 6-story bipedal platforms with rotating cannon arrays and armor that had survived direct hits from military-grade munitions on 3 different worlds. They landed with a sound like 2 buildings falling over. The crowd scattered properly this time. For 2 full blocks, the street cleared. Reed saw them and went very still. Holt appeared at his shoulder. "I'm looking at those things and I'm thinking about the crane operator on the Bay Bridge approach." Reed turned. "What crane operator?" "There's a construction project running on the approach road." "Tower crane, guy's been up there since 7 a.m. Reed got on the radio. "This is Sergeant Reed. I need to talk to whoever's running the Bay Bridge construction crew." 3 minutes later, a voice came back. The crane operator's name was Jim Delaney. He was 55, had been operating heavy equipment for 30 years, was a Union man to his bones, and was currently watching an alien walker stomp up Market Street toward his work zone. "That thing got a permit to operate on public infrastructure?" Jim said. "No," Reed said. "Is it OSHA compliant?" "Jim, I'm just asking. It is not OSHA compliant." A pause. Then Jim said very calmly, "I got line of sight from up here." "Jim, wait for my signal." "Waiting," Jim said. Though his hand was already on the controls, the walkers pushed up Market Street. Police fell back. The alien ground forces, seeing the machines advance, surged forward to follow. For the first time, it felt like the invasion had momentum. On the command ship, Draven watched and allowed himself something close to relief. The machines always worked. On every world, in every campaign, the walkers always worked. He did not know about Gary Coleman yet. He did not know that Gary Coleman, the retired drama teacher from Marin County with the trombone and the permit, had spent the last 40 minutes doing something that seemed completely insane and turned out to be one of the most effective pieces of urban combat coordination anyone had ever accidentally performed. Gary had a megaphone. Gary knew every musician on that parade route. He had been coming to this event for 22 years. He knew the drum line directors, the marching band section leaders, the DJ truck operators, and the sound engineers on every major float. And in the past 40 minutes, he had personally walked to 12 of them and told them exactly what he needed. The walkers were 3 blocks from the Civic Center when the sound hit them. It was not one sound. It was every sound. Every speaker, every instrument, every PA system on every float, and every stage within 6 blocks pointed in the same direction and played at maximum volume simultaneously. The sonic barrage hit the walkers' sensor arrays like a physical wall. Their targeting systems scrambled. Their navigation AIs fed back. One walker stumbled. The other stopped completely, its computer brain trying to process inputs it was never designed to receive. Gary Coleman stood on top of a parade float, trombone raised. Conducting, he looked like he had been born for this exact moment, and Reed, watching from behind a concrete barrier with his radio already in hand, said quietly, "Jim." Now, Jim Delaney moved the crane. He had been watching the walker from his cab at the top of the tower, 190 feet above the street. With the patience of a man who had spent 30 years waiting for exactly the right moment to pick up exactly the right thing. The crane arms swung on his command, smooth and precise, carrying a 3,000-pound steel beam that had been waiting all morning to become part of a bridge and was about to become something else entirely. The beam connected with the lead walker's upper sensor cluster at approximately 40 miles per hour. The noise it made was the kind of noise that caused everyone within 4 blocks to stop what they were doing and say nothing for approximately 1 second. Then the crowd, what remained of it on Market Street, made a single enormous sound that was part cheer, part shock, and part the specific noise San Franciscans make when something deeply unexpected turns out to be deeply satisfying. The walker staggered. Its cannon array rotated wildly and fired twice into the air, both shots going straight up and disappearing into the clouds, which the watching crowd correctly identified as fireworks. Someone immediately started filming. Someone else immediately posted it. Within 4 minutes, it had been viewed by 200,000 people in cities that had no idea what was actually happening. Jim Delaney swung the crane arm back and hit the walker again. The second impact cracked the joint between the walker's torso and its left leg assembly. Police fire, which had been bouncing off the armor all afternoon, suddenly found a gap. Reed directed fire teams to the damaged joint, with the focused calm of someone who had spent 2 decades learning exactly how to communicate under pressure. The second walker attempted to move around the first. It made it half a block before Gary Coleman's sound wall hit it too. Its targeting systems scrambled the same way the first ones had. It stopped. It fired twice at nothing. One blast hit an empty food cart. The other hit a portable restroom unit in a way that was deeply undignified for a military weapon from an advanced civilization. On the command ship, Draven watched his walkers lose their targeting capability to what his instrument panel described as unclassified audio interference from cultural event infrastructure. He read that line twice. "Cultural event infrastructure," he said. Cray nodded carefully. "The humans appear to have repurposed their parade sound system as a combat asset, sir." Draven looked at the footage of Gary Coleman on the float, conducting the street musicians with a trombone like a general, directing an orchestra that was also an army. "Who is that man?" Draven said. "We believe he is a retired educator, sir." A silence. "A retired educator," Draven said, in the tone of someone revising their entire understanding of a species. Meanwhile, Harold Mercer's block association had solved the roof problem. The solution had taken 38 minutes and involved Harold's neighbor Dave, who had spent 14 years as a firefighter and knew exactly how a building's internal access points worked. Leading a group of 8 men up through the building's fire escape to the 3rd floor, which connected via a maintenance hatch to the roof structure, while Harold stood in his kitchen and spoke to the alien squad leader through the ceiling with the patient. Unbothered persistence of a man who had argued with the City Planning Commission and won. "You have 2 options," Harold said, standing below the hatch in his kitchen, coffee in hand. "You come down on your own or my neighbors come up," the alien squad leader said through the floor. "We are military combatants. We do not take orders from—" The hatch opened. Dave's face appeared. He was 67 years old, had forearms like steel cables, and looked at the alien squad with an expression that suggested he had seen worse on New Year's Eve. "You want to do this easy or hard?" Dave said. The squad leader looked at his 7 soldiers. He looked at Dave. He looked at Harold's kitchen below. He made a rapid tactical assessment. "Easy," he said. 8 Zorvian soldiers climbed down through a kitchen hatch into Harold Mercer's Victorian kitchen in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood, one at a time. Harold poured himself more coffee. Brian watched from the hallway. Jake filmed the whole thing on his phone and had a working title for the video already. The aliens sat in Harold's living room. Harold looked at them. "Anybody want coffee?" None of them answered. "Fine," Harold said. He sat down in his chair. "We'll wait for the sergeant." Back on Market Street, with both walkers disabled and the ground forces scattered between the Castro, the Embarcadero, and Harold Mercer's living room. Reed saw the window. He pushed his line forward with every officer he had, coordinating with Holt's marshal network to clear civilians from the push corridor while keeping the surrounding crowd back. The alien ground troops, cut off from the walkers and losing coherent communication with the command ship due to the ongoing audio interference, began falling back to their drop zones. And then Marcus Webb showed up. Marcus had loaded his van, a battered 2009 delivery van with a cracked passenger mirror and a bumper sticker that said "Hot sauce is a love language," with every remaining jar of his inventory. He drove it up 9th Street toward the alien drop zone in a way that his insurance company would later struggle to categorize. He wasn't trying to blow anything up. He was, in his own words, just making sure they didn't get comfortable. He pulled alongside the nearest dropship and opened the van's back doors. He had 42 jars of assorted hot sauce, which he began throwing at the alien ship's open hatch with the efficiency and accuracy of someone who threw things for a living. The Ghost Pepper Reserve found the hatch sealed twice. 2 more alien soldiers discovered the same lesson the first one had. Their screaming was audible from Civic Center. Draven heard it on the command channel and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "What is that?" Cray checked the feed. "A civilian," he said, "is attacking the drop hatch with fermented capsicum compounds, sir." Another silence. "With what?" "Hot sauce, sir." Draven looked at the map. He looked at the ground force positions, scattered, pinned, confused, or sitting in a retired homeowner's living room. He looked at the walker feeds, both offline. He looked at the audio interference data from the parade system. He looked at the image of Jim Delaney's crane swinging a steel beam with the unhurried confidence of a man who simply saw something in his work zone that needed to be moved. He looked at all of it for a long time. Then he said in a voice that was very controlled and very tired, "Open a fleet-wide channel." Cray opened it without a word. Draven straightened his cape, which had, during the course of the afternoon, accumulated a small pride sticker on the shoulder from an unknown point of contact during his brief ground assessment. He chose not to address it. "People of San Francisco," he said, "the Zorvian Dominion acknowledges your resistance." Reed, standing at Civic Center with Holt at his shoulder, looked up at the ships. He clicked his radio. "Are you surrendering or giving a speech?" The translator rendered this as, "Please be direct." Draven's eye twitched. "We are withdrawing." The crowd, which had been watching from every available vantage point, produced a sound that rolled across the city like a wave. But Reed was not done. He looked at Patrick Holt. Holt looked at Reed. Reed spoke into the radio again. "Before you go, you owe us a parade route." There was a pause from the command ship. "Explain." Reed looked at the blocked section of Market Street, at the crushed food cart, at the portable restroom unit that no one was ever going to use again, at 3 displaced parade floats and approximately 4 blocks of disrupted event infrastructure. "You blocked Market Street during a permitted public event," Reed said. "In this city, that comes with consequences." Silence. Then slowly, one of the smaller Zorvian ships descended, opened a cargo hatch, and released a cube of material that Reed's EOD team later identified as an alien alloy worth, according to federal assessors, approximately $4 million. It landed gently on the Civic Center plaza. Holt looked at it. "That'll cover the float repairs," he said. Reed looked at Holt. "And then some." Gary Coleman, still on his float, raised his trombone in the air. The crowd roared. Somewhere on the Embarcadero, Marcus Webb was being interviewed by a journalist and explaining the heat scale of his product line in a way that was going to move a lot of units. And in Harold Mercer's living room, 8 alien soldiers sat in silence while Harold watched the evening news on television. The news was, appropriately, about them. "Huh," Harold said, watching the footage of his own roof. "Good picture quality." The Zorvian fleet began to rise, but in the Castro, First Claw Marin stood for a moment before boarding his dropship. Carl Stevens appeared at his shoulder one final time. Carl held out a foil-wrapped burrito. "For the road," he said. Marin looked at it. He looked at the city. He took the burrito. He did not report this to command. The Zorvian fleet cleared the atmosphere at 6:14 p.m. Pacific time. The last ship disappeared into the cloud layer above the bay at roughly the same moment. The scheduled headline act took the main stage on Market Street. Because the stage crew, who had been sheltering in the production tent for the last 3 hours, had assessed that the coast was clear, and the show had a contract, and the contract said 6 p.m. And they were already running late. The concert started 14 minutes after an alien invasion ended. San Francisco considered this acceptable. Sergeant Thomas Reed stood at Civic Center and watched the sky clear. He had been on his feet for 11 hours. His radio was still going. He had 6 formal incident reports to file. A coordination debrief with the National Guard, who had arrived 45 minutes after the aliens left and were trying very hard to look useful. A meeting with the mayor's office. And at some point, he needed to eat something. He had not eaten since 6 a.m. Patrick Holt appeared at his shoulder and handed him a burrito. Reed looked at it. "Where did this come from?" "Carl from the community cart," Holt said. "He's been feeding people all afternoon. Civilians, officers, apparently at least one alien." He paused. "Good burrito." Reed took it. He ate it standing up, watching the city around him slowly return to what it normally was. Loud, colorful, moving in 17 directions at once. With a specific kind of energy that didn't come from order or planning, but from an enormous number of people who all, individually, had decided to be somewhere, and were going to be there regardless of what the universe threw at them. Jim Delaney's crane had been returned to its original position. Jim had gone back to work. When a reporter reached him by phone an hour later, he confirmed that yes, he had hit an alien war machine with a crane arm, and yes, he would do it again, and no. He was not available for interviews because he was on a deadline, and the bridge approach wasn't going to build itself. Marcus Webb had sold out of every jar he had by 4:30 p.m. He had taken orders for 800 more by 6 p.m. His website crashed at 6:47. He sat in his van outside the ferry building, looking at his phone, and felt something close to peace. Harold Mercer had given the alien soldiers in his living room water, and waited for Reed's officers to arrive and take them into federal custody. Before they left, one of the soldiers, the youngest one, a trooper named Vell who had said nothing the entire time, looked at Harold's framed photos on the wall. Harold's whole life was on that wall. His wife, who had died 7 years ago, his son Brian at various ages, Jake growing up year by year, the neighborhood across decades of photographs. "You have lived here a long time," Vell said. His translator was damaged and the words came out slightly wrong but close enough. 53 years, Harold said. Vell looked at the photos for another moment. Then he said, "I understand why you did not leave." Harold looked at him. "Nobody asked us to," he said, "and if they had, we wouldn't have." Vell nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then Reed's officers came through the door, and that was the end of it. Gary Coleman went home on the ferry. He sat on the upper deck with his trombone case across his knees and watched the city get smaller as the boat moved across the bay. He had been coming to this event for 22 years. He had never had a day like this one. He was not entirely sure what had happened or what his role in it was, but several people had shaken his hand, and one officer had said the audio coordination had been, quote, legitimately critical, and Gary was planning to think about that for a while. He played a few quiet notes on his trombone as the bay opened up around him. No particular song, just something. The water was very calm. Far above in the Zorvian fleet, things were considerably less calm. Overlord Draven stood before the High Council 7 days later. He was still wearing his formal armor. The Pride sticker had been removed from his cape, but he had been informed that 3 separate pieces of human footage showed it clearly, and that these pieces of footage had now been viewed by more humans than there were citizens in the entire Zorvian fleet. The High Chancellor looked at him from across the council chamber. "You failed to hold the city." Draven stood very straight. "We never held it," he said. "We were never going to hold it. That was the mistake. We assumed because their city was disorganized that it was weak. Those are not the same thing." The council was quiet. Draven activated the battle recordings. The council watched it all. Gary Coleman conducting musicians from the top of a parade float. Jim Delaney swinging a crane arm with calm professional precision. Reed's officers pushing forward in coordination with a volunteer event marshal and his clipboard. Marcus Webb throwing hot sauce jars at a military dropship hatch. Harold Mercer sitting in his kitchen with a coffee cup, waiting. Carl Stevens offering a burrito to a combat-armored invader. First Claw Marin declining to fire into a crowd and making the right call alone. The council watched in complete silence. Then one counselor said quietly, "The educator with the horn." What was his rank? Draven looked tired. He had no rank, he had a permit. A pause. What is a permit? It is a document that says you are allowed to be somewhere, Draven said. And in that city it appears to carry significant authority. The Chancellor leaned forward. And the man with the hot sauce, what was his military role? He sells condiments. Silence. He sells condiments, the Chancellor repeated. He sells condiments, Draven confirmed. And he is very good at throwing them. Another counselor pulled up the footage of the walkers going down, one hit by a construction crane, both disabled by parade sound equipment. These were our most advanced ground units. Yes, disabled by music, and one crane. The crane was also civilian, Union, Draven said. Which appears to be a specific category of civilian with additional protective status. The chamber was very quiet. The Chancellor looked at the recordings for a long time, at the city. At the people in it, moving, arguing, feeding each other, playing instruments, driving cabs, selling food, living their lives with a loud, permanent, completely unbothered confidence that the Zorvian Dominion had no category for. What is your formal recommendation? The Chancellor said. Draven spoke clearly and without hesitation. Do not land during a permitted public event. Do not block a parade route. Do not enter a neighborhood without understanding what that neighborhood means to the people in it. Do not mistake loudness for weakness. Do not mistake chaos for vulnerability. Do not send soldiers into a crowd that has spent its history learning to hold its ground. He paused. And do not, under any circumstances, damage a hot sauce vendor's display. The Chancellor absorbed this. And the rest of the planet. Draven thought of Harold Mercer's wall of photographs. 53 years of a life in one place. He thought of Gary Coleman on the ferry, playing something quiet to himself as the city got smaller. He thought of Carl Stevens handing a burrito to a soldier who was supposed to be his enemy, simply because Carl thought nobody should go hungry. The rest of the planet, Draven said, is full of cities just like that one, each one different, each one certain it is the most itself it can possibly be. Each one completely prepared to prove it. He pulled up a final image, the mural that had appeared in the Mission District within 48 hours of the fleet's departure. It showed the silhouette of the eternal verdict retreating into the clouds above the bay. Below it, in letters 10 feet tall, "You picked the wrong weekend." Draven looked at it for a moment. Earth is not a planet, he said. It is several hundred arguments about which neighborhood is best, each one of which would fight you to prove the point. He closed the file. Leave them alone. The Zorvian Dominion formally suspended all Earth operations. The resolution passed unanimously, which had never happened in the Council's 400-year history. In San Francisco, the city filed 11 variance permits, 4 insurance claims, and 1 official noise complaint, submitted by a resident 3 blocks from Market Street who had not known about the invasion and simply felt the event had gone too long. The parade organizers announced the following year's event would include a new float category, defense of the route. Gary Coleman had already submitted his application. He was going to need a bigger trombone section. Reed got home at 11 p.m. He ate another burrito. Carl had sent a box to the precinct and sat in his kitchen for a while before going to bed. He didn't watch the news. He'd been in the news. He already knew what happened. He thought about what Holt had said, standing at Civic Center while the ships rose. 7 years I've been running this route. They had no idea what they were walking into. Reed thought that was about right. You could land a warship over almost any city in the world. You could bring the armor and the plasma rifles and the walkers and the drones. You could have the numbers and the technology and 40 years of unbroken victories behind you. But if you landed in San Francisco on Pride weekend, in a city that had been arguing, building, surviving, and celebrating on those streets for generations, you weren't going to conquer it. You were just going to be in the way of the parade. And San Francisco, as anyone who had ever tried to stand between it and something it cared about could tell you, did not stop for things in its way. It went around them, or through them. Depending on the situation. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, you already know you've got good taste. Share this with someone who needs a good laugh today and drop a comment telling me which moment hit hardest for you. Gary with the trombone, Harold with the coffee, Marcus and the hot sauce. Let me know, and if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? There are more cities out there, and the aliens haven't learned their lesson yet.